Today on Inspired Money.
I got to see the struggles of a new entrepreneur, but I also got to see some of the lifestyle benefits that came along with that. And as I look back now, that probably planted some of the seeds for who I've become as an adult and some of the changes I've made in my own life.
This is episode 111 with co-author of Choose FI, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence, Chris Mamula. Welcome to Inspired Money. My name is Andy Wong, a managing partner at Runnymede Capital Management. Each week, we bring you an interesting person to help you get inspired, shift your perspectives on money, and achieve incredible things. From making it to giving it away, Inspired Money means making a difference, creating something bigger than oneself, and maybe, just maybe, making the world a better place. Thank you for joining me. Hey, Inspired Moneymaker, welcome back. If it's your first time listening, welcome. Today's guest is Chris Mamula. He retired at age 41, moved to Utah with his wife and daughter. He enjoys spending time with his family, skiing and doing other outdoor activities, but it's not all play, no work. He writes for the financial blog CanIRetireYet.com, and he's the primary author of the new book, Choose FI, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence. In this episode, you'll learn one way a dual income couple successfully saved 50% of their income, showing us that FI is possible with starting salaries in the 30,000s, defining financial independence with the rule of 25, and challenges of choosing the financial independence path, some emotional, some tactical. Now let's get inspired with Chris Mamula. Chris, welcome to Inspired Money. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
I don't remember a lot about talking about money directly, but I definitely have some indirect lessons that I remember as a kid. My dad, he started working as a newspaper photographer straight out of high school. Probably when I was about 9 or 10 years old, he quit. He left his job, just didn't like doing it anymore. And he started his own photography business. And so I got to see the struggles of a new entrepreneur, but I also got to see some of the lifestyle benefits that came along with that. And as I look back now, that probably planted some of the seeds for who I've become as an adult and some of the changes I've made in my own life. And then probably the other real big overriding theme is from my mom. I just learned frugality. We never really had much of a household income, a very big household income. My parents were both high school educated. What she did really well, though, is she made our money stretch as far as you could make it go. And so we always had everything we needed. And then even beyond that, I mean, they really saved well. They were able to help both my brother and I get through our undergraduate degrees. You know, they lived responsibly. And I remember one probably true money memory, back to your original question, was I know they paid off our mortgage. And I remember we talked about that. And it was probably, I was probably in junior high, so it didn't take them very long to do that. And so just in general, being very anti-debt and being very responsible with money.
Sounds like a solid foundation. So Chris, you wrote a new book with Brad and Jonathan at Choose FI. The book is called Choose FI, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence. How did that collaboration come together?
So we talked a little bit about my foundation. So there was a lot of things that I did right, and I was building wealth pretty quickly. I really didn't think that early retirement, meaning somebody in their 30s or 40s, I didn't think that was possible. I really didn't have a goal. And I found this FIRE movement. I stumbled upon it, and it changed my life. I probably, because I was a good saver and I had a pretty good foundation, I probably would have retired early at 55 or 60. And having found this, I was able to leave my career at 41. And I bought back basically 2 decades of my life when my daughter's young. And it's really changed my life. So it was something I was passionate about, and I wanted to write this book. My idea for the book was I'm a huge Tim Ferriss fan. And so he has a podcast that's been very successful where he interviews people from all walks of life who have been very successful. And I listened to all those, but I still went out and I bought his book. It's called Tools of Titans, where he took all these lessons and turned it into a book. And I thought that would be great with the financial independence community, all these people that have helped me. So my idea was I'd start a podcast and eventually I'd turn it into a book. That was my long-term goal. And then I found these two guys. They started a podcast of their own called Choose FI. And it was basically exactly what I wanted to do. And so I would love to make this a great movie story, like where like I just loved them and I wanted to work with them. But honestly, I kind of wanted them to fail because they were doing exactly what I wanted to do, and I kind of felt like they took my idea. But as I listened to them, I really liked them. I loved their messaging, and they were doing really what I wanted to do. So instead of trying to compete with them, I just reached out and I said, "This was my long-term idea. How about if we work together on the book?" And they were actually very receptive. Apparently, they had just been having this conversation of they're having these conversations on the podcast that are really powerful, but they're kind of just coming in randomly. And so if they could put it together into a book to make it a little more linear, and so they totally bought in, and so that's how it all came about.
When you have that initial feeling that, oh, shucks, those guys beat me to it, how difficult is it to turn your mindset around and turn that into an opportunity?
Talking about like growing up and seeing my dad as an entrepreneur, I think one thing that he really always taught me is just looking for opportunities and kind of finding things where other people would see challenges. You'd look for ways to find opportunities and looking for ways that you can add value to other people. So I started with probably more of a selfish motive of, okay, these guys did a lot of the work that I was going to do. That helps me. And they were starting to, I latched on with them very early. So they didn't have a huge audience. I didn't know the platform was going to become what it was today, but it was still bigger and it gave me a platform to launch a book from. So I was looking at it first kind of selfishly, but then I looked at how can I give them something back? So I didn't, when I proposed to them, I proposed kind of what I just told you. And it's kind of ironically what they had just been talking about a few days earlier of we can put this together and package it in a different way that still adds value to their customers. And I can add value to them because it creates a product for them that they can then sell. So kind of looking at it that way is how I approached it.
Let's take a step back and talk a little bit about your personal experience with financial independence. You mentioned that you were a good saver, so likely you were going to retire around 55 or 60 if you hadn't discovered this FIRE movement. You were able to retire, I think it was almost 2 years ago at age 41. You and your wife were pretty natural savers, it sounds like.
Yeah, so we talked about my background just being very anti-debt. My wife came at things from a totally different background, probably income-wise, very similar to my family. But we talked about how my mom was extremely savvy with money, and I think that's pretty rare. And her background was kind of more the traditional story where people just struggle with money. And her family had some struggles like when she was in high school that I think it kind of scarred her. And so when I approached her about wanting to be debt-free, she was totally on board. And so what we started doing was she had some debt because she put herself through school, and I was getting out of school basically debt-free. And so we started just living off of her salary and using everything I was bringing in while I was still in grad school. And then as I started my career to get her out of debt. And so it was working for us. So we just kind of kept going with that. So yeah, we didn't know about the FIRE movement, or there was no FIRE movement back then, but it was just working for us and it felt good. So we just kind of always had that 50% savings rate where we lived off of her income and we banked mine. And that's what we've done.
Yeah, 50% savings rate is pretty enviable and uncommon, right? But your motivation was strictly just not to carry debt because you wanted flexibility and that freedom?
Yeah, that's where we started. And then, like I said, it just kind of felt good to have some cushion. And so I guess we first started, we kept saving with the goal of that was going to be a big down payment for a house. And then once we got our house, and then we just we started paying ahead on our mortgage. And then the other part of that was just going to start shoveling it into investments. And we saw we were building wealth pretty quickly. And again, we didn't really have a game plan or really even think it was possible for ordinary people from ordinary backgrounds with pretty ordinary jobs to do something that, when you compare it to what most people do, it kind of looks extraordinary now, but we didn't really have that end goal or end game. And we made a lot of mistakes, and we could have gotten there actually even significantly faster if we would have had a plan. But in some ways, I think it was a blessing to not know about this whole idea of FIRE and early retirement, because we really weren't focused on saving every penny we could. And we lived a pretty great lifestyle in the process. And we traveled. We've done some pretty remarkable things, from international travel to attending Super Bowls. And so our story is definitely not one of like pinching every penny that I think people associate with a story like this.
It seems like the masses, one, they're not saving 50% of their income. The tendency is to have lifestyle creep. As you're making more, you spend more. Is that something that you had to resist? And did you write down goals to make an effort for that not to happen? Or was that not an issue for you and your wife?
No. So, again, an area where we were really lucky. And as I look back at this, it's kind of almost hard to say this without sounding like maybe like smug or arrogant, but I really don't know where we got the insight to do this, the whole 50% savings rate. I really don't know. Because like I said, we didn't have a goal. We didn't have a plan. We didn't have a role model. It's just something we just started doing because it just kind of felt good. And I think a lot of people, it's very hard because they find this whole idea of early retirement or even just saving for retirement at all after they let this lifestyle creep in. And because we started so early, it was extremely easy for us to save because my wife was only making about $35,000 a year when we started. And then when I started out of school, it was very close to that. But both of our careers grew in parallel. So we ended up, again, we never made huge money, probably topping out at like the high $80,000, low $90,000 range. But that's a pretty substantial amount of growth. So we were able to inflate our lifestyle. So we never had to cut back. So we were inflating our lifestyle, but continuing to save that 50% because we were living off one and saving one as they grew in parallel. So it was kind of easy, but I think that's because we started so early, and that's not probably the case for most people, unfortunately. So they're going to probably have to feel a little bit of pain from it, from probably having to cut back.
Yeah, it's impressive that you could start at such an early stage. You weren't making big dual incomes. You were committed to each other so that you could collaborate and work on this together.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to be said for being on the same page. And it's kind of ironic. So we were always on the same page and we never fought about money. And then as we found this whole idea of FIRE and we started talking about early retirement, we really kind of started to have some kind of cracks in the foundation. And we really, because for me, I was really, as I found this, I was very motivated to retire early. And because I was just kind of burning out, I was in the healthcare field, I was a physical therapist, and I was just kind of ready to be done and move on. And for my wife, the whole saving, it just kind of came from a sense of security. And she's changed her career several times. She had a math degree, then she got an MBA, and then she had just gotten an operations research degree as we were finding this. And she never actually worked in her field, and she actually still wanted to work. And also she just didn't like the whole idea of this scarcity when you're retiring and you're drawing down your investments, when all along we had this abundance and this surplus. And so, yeah, it started to actually create some cracks in the foundation and some arguments. And we actually, after going through probably 12 or 15 years of marriage with really never having a fight about money, all of a sudden we're having just stupid fights about money as we're in the best financial position we've ever been in. So it's kind of an interesting twist and something that I definitely don't try to run and hide from, but I try to talk to people about so people realize that I think there's this almost conception that once you build wealth and you can retire and like all your problems go away, and it doesn't work that way. And it's a problem as old as time, but people, for whatever reason, still believe that is the truth.
Well, it sounds like your relationship and views on money are evolving all the time, and it's changing. You wrote an article about Dirtbag Millionaire, and you've also had friends who were making high incomes and were not happy in their job tracks. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship with money and happiness and fulfillment, what you observed?
Yeah. So my wife and I, we started probably when we were just right after we got married. We did a trip to the Grand Canyon and we did a backpacking trip. And that's the first time either of us had ever done anything like that. And we just both fell in love with the outdoors. And so from there, it led to more backpacking and then climbing and mountaineering and skiing. And we just really got into that lifestyle. And there's this term, it's really originated from the climbing community, being a dirtbag. And these people that basically, they just go all in on this lifestyle of, maybe they're living out of a car. I mean, maybe they crash on people's couches. Some people live in a cave just because they're so committed to being out climbing every day. And on one hand, it's really appealing, like that somebody goes all in on what they're passionate about, but then it kind of is accompanied by, you have to be poor. We've been poor and we don't like that feeling either. And so, but like, how can we take the best of that lifestyle and doing something we're passionate about? And then on the other side, we'd come back from our weekend adventures. So I was a physical therapist and we made okay money, but then I had friends that were orthopedic surgeons were making $300,000-$400,000 a year. And because they kind of lived the doctor lifestyle. They had the cars, the country club memberships, the big houses, all that stuff. They really weren't free. I mean, they made a lot of money, but they were no happier than any people who I saw coming in. Like we were in a steel mill town, and these poorer people that came in, and they kind of all lived the exact same lifestyle. Whatever you made, you spent to your income, and they weren't happy. So we tried to take the best of that dirtbag of living your passions and the best of that professional lifestyle and making the money, but then saving a lot of it to build the lifestyle we wanted. So I termed that a dirtbag millionaire, and kind of combining the best of both worlds. You
mentioned that you didn't feel like a sacrifice to be saving. I think that there's an idea that in order to be financially independent, right, there's an equation. It's how much are you going to make? how much are you going to spend? And then your savings, how much can you invest and generate? But the savings for you wasn't a difficulty.
It really wasn't at all, because I think, like I said, until we got to this point where we started talking about actually retiring and changing things, my wife and I, our spending and our income and our lifestyle, everything was in perfect alignment, and there was really no conflict there. So yeah, I think if you can line up your values with your spending, and I think that's where most people get tripped up is, you go to college because everybody says that's the thing to do, and it might be or it might not be, but you have to make that decision and on your own. And then you get out of college or out of high school or whatever, and the first thing you do is you get the car and you get the house, and you determine how much house you can afford by, you get pre-qualified based on your income, and you buy up to that level, and you go into a car dealership and they ask you what's the payment you want to have, and it's the most you can afford. And there's really little intentionality. And so I think if you can have some intentionality and spend, if you truly value a big house, then great, do it. But I think a lot of people just do it because that's what you do, and they don't question things. And so if you can line up your spending with your values, yeah, it really is not sacrifice at all. At least it wasn't for us.
So it sounds like the other half of that is defining your values. And in the case for you and your wife, you're working together, so you have to do that jointly. And then really striving for determining how much is enough. Did you and your wife have to go through like a formal process of doing that?
Starting, no, because so there's two sides of the equation, right? There's the spending side, but there's also the earning side. And so we were earning above average, not huge, but we were earning above average incomes. And then our income was growing and we kind of just reached the point where we were happy. And really our limiting factor became not money, but it became time, or we didn't have enough vacation time. So no, throughout the accumulation phase, no. But as we started thinking about leaving the workforce, leaving behind these incomes and this comfortable lifestyle, I mean, definitely then, yes. So we never really had a budget, but we started tracking and we looked at where all of our money went, and to really get a sense of how much are we spending, what does our lifestyle cost, because that's really what determines how much you need to be financially independent to continue to support the spending that you want. So at that point we did. And I do think there's value. Like I said, I feel fortunate that we didn't know and we didn't have a tight budget early on. And I think that's why we were so happy through most of our journey, and it was so easy. But there is value in knowing where your money goes, because as we started tracking, we realized even as much as we were saving, we were spending a lot on stuff that added zero value to our lives. So we cut stuff like the cable bill that it just kind of, it was there, and we had enough, we could afford it, but it really added no value to our lives. So we ended up cutting cable, and we actually ended up I'm not a technology person, so I was still using a flip phone when we started doing this. And I was like, I'm paying way more than all these bloggers I'm reading about for my stupid flip phone. And so I ended up buying like a good smartphone, and with the cheap, they're called MVNO plans, where you're buying like leftover minutes from the major carriers. So I cut my cell phone bill by about 50 or 60%, and I actually had better service and a better phone. So just by tracking and looking at where your money is going and paying attention, you can definitely find things where you can spend less and actually live better, which is a pretty important concept, I think.
Did you guys go down to one car?
We did, but just recently. So we met at FinCon, this financial bloggers conference, and literally the day I left, we just sold our second car. But we talk about like that lifestyle creep. So when we were both working, it made a lot of sense to have two cars. I left my job in December 2017, and we talked about getting rid of it. And we're like, well, let's see what our lifestyle looks like. And we really did not need two cars. But then we moved to Utah. And so then we were like, we should get rid of a car. And it's like, it was kind of scary. So we actually had a friend drive our car the whole way across the country. And like now that we live here, we've kind of downsized a little bit. So we have a 1-car garage. And it was really an inconvenience more than a convenience to have two cars, because we'd constantly be shuffling cars around, and we couldn't put the car we were driving in the winter in because it'd be blocked in. So we couldn't use our garage all winter because the other car was in there. And it took us like 2 years to finally sell our car. So yeah, it's definitely, I think it's hard to wind back that lifestyle inflation, even if it's something you really don't value. So yeah, but yes, we did go down to one car. Short answer, very long, sorry.
Coming up, we talk about people's evolving definitions of what FI means, Chris's mistakes with financial advisors, and healthcare in early retirement. All that and more right after this short break. The show notes for this episode can be found at inspiredmoney.fm/111. If you're listening in your car or wherever you are, check the show notes if you want to learn more about Chris or things mentioned in this episode. It's time for the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Defining financial independence, or FI, is not easy. Just like everyone who is pursuing conventional or traditional retirement when you're in your 60s and 70s, they do things differently. If you're pursuing financial independence in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever your age, that's bound to look different too. In the second half of today's episode, Chris is going to mention a more generic definition of financial independence, so I want to give you a heads up. In all retirement planning, people talk about the 4% rule. Summarizing the rule quickly, it says that you can withdraw 4% of your portfolio on day one of your retirement. You can then withdraw a similar percentage every year thereafter, adjusting the amount to keep pace with inflation. Based on history, taking out this 4% amount every year, you will have a very good chance of not running out of money. It's important, of course, because you're no longer making money in retirement or accumulating, but rather you're living off of your nest egg. This is the decumulation stage. A guy named William Bengen did extensive research a couple decades ago based on US data, and his research showed that on a 30-year retirement, a 30-year time span, you can spend 4% of your portfolio fairly safely. So another way to look at this is the reciprocal of the 4% rule, and it's called the rule of 25. The rule of 25 gets a little more intuitive. If you spend $50,000 per year, multiply that amount by 25, and you'll come up with a figure of $1,250,000. It's not perfect, but it's good enough that you can use it as an indicator or direction telling you how much you need to save. For an even more intuitive way to look at things is the rule of 300. The rule of 300 is the same thing, but it looks at this issue by breaking it down to a monthly amount. It's 25 times 12 months, which is 300. For every $1,000 you spend per month that you need to support your lifestyle, it's going to require $300,000 in a conventional asset allocation portfolio. Then, if you want to be more conservative, you could make it $400,000, so the rule of 400. But the majority of people say that the 300s are probably workable. 400 if you want to be more safe. For a lot of people, looking at a monthly spending number is just a little bit easier to wrap your head around than thinking about an annual number. So I want to ask you to go through this quick exercise because it can be really useful. Take a look at your monthly spending. See how much you're spending on average every month, and then multiply that number by 300. See if that helps guide you towards how much savings you'll need in order to retire and live comfortably. Whether you choose financial independence or not, these are some useful, quick calculations to help you know where you are financially. You can also set some clear goals accordingly. That's the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Inspired Money is brought to you by Runnymede Capital Management. We help you to plan, invest, and worry less. I love the idea of making your money matter. Are you doing the best you can to save, invest, and give? I'd really love to hear ways that you're making money matter in your life. Shoot me an email by going to inspiredmoney.fm/Andy. That's inspiredmoney.fm/ANDY. I might just share your message on a future Inspired Money, so send me a note. You're listening to Inspired Money. I'm Andy Wong. You mentioned that you and your wife did not have any arguments about money for a long stretch of time, 12 or 15 years. But in the book, Choose FI, I think that you wrote that there were some unintended consequences, that you did have some issues as you were trying to reach financial independence, that you were finding that there were things that were making you not happy.
I think that throughout our journey, we were accumulating a lot of money without really thinking about money. And as money started to become the focus of our life, a couple things happened. Number one, we always were, I think, pretty generous as far as giving to charity and just generally spending our money on doing stuff like travel. And then all of a sudden, I think we started to pay too close attention. And it's I think it kind of made us judgmental. Like, should we really be giving our money? Like, is this charity doing what we think, or could we better use our money? Or should we be, spending on, should we be going out to this dinner and stuff that added value to our lives? All of a sudden we're like overthinking it and too focused on money. And then another thing, like we talked about a lot of the stuff we did right, but one of the things we did wrong, we made a lot of investing and tax planning mistakes because we just were totally ignorant. And so part of that was ignorance, and part of it was following bad advice from a financial advisor who we were working with. And yeah, I mean, just looking and seeing all these other people that it seemed like they were on this quote unquote like perfect or optimized path, and seeing all of our mistakes where, again, we were spending literally $10,000-$20,000 a year on unnecessary fees and taxes because of our lack of knowledge. And just knowing that and how it set us back, it kind of almost put me in I wouldn't say depression, but yeah, I mean, I was definitely like over focused on mistakes that I couldn't go back and change. So there was a lot of things I was kind of feeling trapped. And then the other thing is I really wanted to retire. Like I kind of thought like retirement was like going to fix my problems, and it was the thing I wanted. But as I started to really get knowledgeable about what retirement actually entails, I realized like that it's going to introduce its own challenge, kind of like we talked about this kind of scarcity where we had all this abundance. And so then I almost felt more trapped by my knowledge. And so, yeah, it definitely introduced a lot of struggles, and I had to work through a lot of those things.
How scary is the transition from an accumulation phase to decumulation phase?
I would say terrifying, and I can't speak to it because we decided not to take that exact path because it is so terrifying. And I write at the blog called Can I Retire Yet?, where we talk a lot about that retirement decision. And what I've experienced is what I find from a lot of readers and other people who I talk to is, you get to this point and you really never know. And particularly for an early retiree, it's hard enough planning a traditional retirement at 65 where you have maybe 20 or 30 years of life left. But when you're doing this at 40, or some people, the more extreme stories in the FIRE movement, maybe at 30, there's really no way you can have any validity to saying that we have these projections, and you're trying to project out over 60 years when there's just so many unknowns, and just a minor mistake compounded out over 50 or 60 years is going to have drastic impacts. So what we eventually ended up doing is saying, what do we really want from retirement? And for us, it was time with our young daughter. It was having more time to get out into the outdoors and seek this adventure. It was time together as a couple. It was just really having time to breathe and we talk in the book about being on the hamster wheel and just stepping off that and just kind of determining what you really want. So how could we get all those things, but not have all of the downsides of retirement, which is this scarcity mentality, this uncertainty, this fear that comes with spending down your portfolio. And so what we ultimately landed on is we wanted to have enough financial independence where we know we have a huge runway. Like if we had no income for 10 or even 20 years, we would be fine. We could be fine. But is retirement and not doing anything productive and not earning any income what we really want? And we kind of decided not. So like right now, my wife continues to work about 28 hours a week, but we live in Utah now, and she works for a company out of Northern Virginia. It's totally remote, very flexible hours. We're able to get our healthcare there. So all these uncertainties and fears are kind of taken away just by that. I wrote this book, I write on the blog. So as of this point, I haven't really made much of any income, but there's potential there. And I'm still able to impact other people and help them as I did as a physical therapist. So a lot of the things that I got value from in my career, I'm still getting value from now. And so we're able to kind of get the best of both worlds, kind of that whole dirtbag millionaire idea of, how can we take the best out of these different situations and combine them into the lifestyle that we really want versus, trading one devil for another, if you will.
In the book, you took a lot of the interviews of different people on the path to FI. How different are people's definitions of what financial independence means to them?
Yeah, so I think that's evolving. I think this is really a kind of a new phenomenon, like where a couple of years ago, if you would have went to we just talked about this FinCon bloggers conference, I think the whole conference was a couple hundred people, and the financial independence community was a handful, 10 or 15 bloggers. And now this has kind of blown up. And I think this year it was like 2,500 people at the conference. And I mean, you were there, and I'm just estimating, but I would say at least 1,000, if not, were there because they're motivated by this whole idea of financial independence and FIRE. And it's really, it has really become a movement where people are so passionate about this, and it's growing. So yeah, we'll see where it goes.
You mentioned that some of your frustration or even near depression centered around mistakes that you made. On Inspired Money, we haven't delved in detail about the difference between different financial advisors. Can you talk about some of the mistakes that you made and lessons that you learned?
When I say I used a financial advisor, I mean, that's such a generic term, and so many people call themselves financial advisors. So the person we were using was a commission-based salesman. And so we were buying loaded mutual funds, which charge you a percentage of your money upfront. In our case, I think it was like 5.5% just in commissions. And we knew that, but then there's all these other conflicts that come with that, with what they're going to recommend, and all these fees on the back end that we didn't understand, and conflicts that you should invest with the advisor because the only way they get paid is by selling you product versus not using a 401k. So there's a lot of conflicts that go with that. And we really didn't ask any questions, and we really didn't know what questions to ask, and we didn't even know there were these different terms. And so we were coming at it from just a position of complete ignorance. And so we learned that now. There's a model where you do assets under management, where you charge a percentage of the assets that the advisor manages. And I think that's a better model, but it comes with its own conflicts. And then you can just pay for fee for service, where you go in and you need specific advice for a particular problem, and you pay a flat fee for that advice. And then there's all kind of hybrid models, and it's a very difficult world for the consumer to navigate if you don't know what questions to ask and you don't know what you're looking for. So when I had my bad experience, I became very dogmatic, like everybody should be a do-it-yourselfer, and it's not that hard. And then I got into the real world, and I started dealing with my parents, and I started dealing with readers of my blog who called with questions, and I realized a lot of people do need help. And so I still write from the perspective of, you need to educate yourself, and a lot of people can do it yourself. Like the investing part really is not that hard, but a whole financial plan and tying everything together is pretty challenging. And so a lot of people do need help. So while I still would love to educate people to be do-it-yourselfers, I've also realized that there's a big need to help people connect with the help that they actually need, and finding the right people and knowing what questions to ask. So that's a big part of what I write about now, and the big part of the focus that I want to take going forward.
Yeah, my firm, Runnymede Capital Management, we're fee only. We would fit in that second bucket where we charge a fee based off of assets under management. And yeah, I think that there can be some conflicts there, but certainly far fewer than if we were selling commission-based products where certain products pay us more than others.
There's just kind of different buckets of people who need that ongoing support, and there's a ton of value. And if you get value and you know what you're paying, then I have zero problem with that. But I think a lot of people, they just don't understand what they're paying and what those conflicts are. And so I just try to elucidate that for people.
Well, it's challenging. As you said, there are a lot of people who call themselves financial advisors or financial consultants, and that comes in many, many different colors. That could be an insurance salesperson. That could be someone who works at a brokerage firm. So really, they're just a salesperson, and not necessarily people with investment backgrounds. So it varies a lot. The irony is that as a fee-only advisor, our clients see the fees. Like there's transparency, which I think is good, but the downside is that our clients see our fees versus some of our competitors who their clients will say, oh, my advisor doesn't charge me anything, or they only charge me $500 a year.
Yeah. And like now there's this growing field of financial coaches who don't have any, who don't call themselves advisors. And it's a totally different branch of this. And they'll say like they don't have all these conflicts because they're not managing money and stuff. And that's true. But then we're just talking about conflicts still. That still doesn't even get to the idea of competence. And anybody can call themselves, just like anybody, a lot of people can call themselves financial advisors, but at least there's some regulations. As far as a financial coach, anybody can call themselves that. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of the Wild West, and you really, as a consumer, it's a very difficult environment to step into if you're, and to think that you can hand over to anybody, be it a coach, an advisor, anybody, without doing some homework. I mean, you're just setting yourself up for disaster. So even if you are determined that you can't do this yourself, which is fine, and you want help, that's fine. But you still have to go in educated, or you're walking on and through a minefield, and good luck.
Right, exactly. Well, I think that it comes down to one's own comfort level. Do they feel that they can do it themselves? And do they feel that they have time to take and do the study and a little bit of research to do it on their own? Because I kind of liken it to if I'm trying to register a trademark or service mark, I feel like I could do that myself, but alternatively, I could hire a lawyer to do that for me. So it's all about choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I just wrote a book, and I'm sure I could have went through every step of the process to self-publish a book, but I don't plan on writing any more books, or maybe if I do, one more in my life. So it's just not a good use of my time. So I think you have to also look at what things should you be farming out, like what things are just not worth it, and what things are going to give you that just repetitive return on investment. If it's something you have to do all the time, and it's worth it, then you have to look at it that way versus something that's a one-time thing, and it's really just not worth your time to spend hours and hours researching to get into. So yeah, there's a lot of aspects to it.
Chris, now that you've retired early, is healthcare the biggest challenge that, Americans planning early retirement face?
I think there's a lot of challenges, kind of like we talked with the psychological, but from just a pure financial planning standpoint, absolutely. It's like when we plugged in our numbers. So if we start from, you asked like how people define financial independence. If we can start with a kind of a generic definition of, if you figure out your expenses and you have 25 times those, you're financially independent. And that's based on the 4% rule. And that's a whole nother conversation that's probably not worth getting into. But if we just start with that as a starting point, a good guideline. If you look at like the health, if you're buying your insurance through the marketplace today, if you buy something fully subsidized, so for my wife and I think we could get, we pay about $250 or $300 a month buying our health insurance through her employer. We would actually save money by retiring fully and getting a full subsidy. We would spend less than $100 to insure our whole family. On the flip side of that, if we had to pay the full freight cost, I think it would be about $16,000 or $17,000 a year right now, and we're young. And so as we get older, the price goes up. And then also over time, healthcare costs keep inflating much faster than general inflation. So just that one number, I mean, how do you possibly know how much you need? And you can say, well, you should save for the full cost. But even at that, if it keeps inflating, that number just keeps growing every year. And it's hard for people to cover that. And on the flip side, if you save for that and the law stays the way it is, or if we go to like a Medicare for all or something and it's totally different system, you may end up oversaving and spending years and years of your life just saving just for that one number. And so, yeah, I mean, it's such a complex issue, but you have to do something to plan for it and have a plan and have contingencies, because A, it's really expensive, and B, we don't have stability. We don't know where it's going to be in 10 years or 5 years or really even 1 year from now. So it's a major challenge.
Well, I understand that your wife is really big with spreadsheets, so you can crunch a lot of numbers and adjust accordingly, right? Because it can be a moving target.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So for our listener today who is interested in your story and your ability to retire at 41, what kind of resources can you recommend? I know that you've read a lot of blogs. You have this book coming out. Can you share some of the blogs and resources that you like to point people to?
Well, I mean, there's so many that's kind of why I wrote the book, is because I think what you have to do is find the things that fit with your where you're at, your stage, and then kind of pick the lessons that work, but not get dogmatic about following anybody. And so that's kind of I love the Choose FI podcast for that reason. They're bringing on a lot of different people with a lot of different stories, but nobody's going to match up exactly to yours. So I think the key is kind of picking and choosing and just matching up the things that work for you and throwing away the things that don't, and not getting dogmatic about following any particular person. As far as specific ones, I mean, the site that I now write for is called Can I Retire Yet? And I found that I was actually a reader for about 5 years before I started writing there. And it was a one-man show, a gentleman named Daryl Kirkpatrick. And I reached out to him because I kind of sensed that he was kind of just burning out on writing the blog. And I just asked if he would like some fresh blood and have a partner on the site. And so that's why I write there. But I mean, that was a great resource. And he's written if you're just looking at more traditional retirement, he's written a book called Can I Retire Yet?, which is a really great book that helped me a lot with my planning. So, I mean, that's one. And there's a lot of some of the bigger names from the FIRE community. Mr. Money Mustache is, if you really just need kind of to use his term, a punch in the face to kind of change your perspective, and he will deliver that for you. That's a great source. There's a person who I think is very offbeat from most of the traditional FIRE stuff, but that I found a lot of value. A guy named Todd Tressiter, who writes at Financial Mentor, and he has a book called I think it's called How Much Money Do You Need to Retire? And the book is not really at all about that. It kind of draws you in with that, but he kind of really made me think differently. So there's a lot of great resources, but you really kind of have to find the couple that resonate with you.
I really like the format of the Choose FI book, because each chapter you're really addressing different topics. But most of all, I like that you conclude each chapter with action steps. so that there's a concept, but then the reader, it's like, all right, here's how you can take action, or these are exercises that you can finish the chapter with to actually do something.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't take action, that really doesn't move the needle or change anything. And that's something that I drew from the podcast. They'll really, a lot of times they'll just get into the middle of the story and they'll just stop it. And so the podcast is two hosts, Brad and Jonathan. And Jonathan's just like a mile a minute. He's 100% energy. And Brad is really his polar opposite. And so they kind of complement each other. He is, yep. And he's very analytical, and he kind of just really sits back and really listens. And he does a great job of like stopping the interview, and he'll just say, "Can we touch on this?" And they're always trying to pull out these actionable points from each interview. And then we really tried to reproduce that in the book, where what are the action steps you can actually take? So no matter where you're at, like we'll talk about cutting your costs, but what are the specific actions you can take wherever you're at in your journey? And how can we help you to facilitate that? Or if you need to increase your income, we talk about maybe building a network. And what are a few things you can do literally today? Sit down the book and go take action and start doing those things. And we found that was really important because, again, like knowledge without acting on it is as good as not knowing anything at all, right? Because if you're not using the knowledge, then it's kind of worthless. And I think that's what a lot of books do. And we really wanted to translate that and make it applicable.
So you're in Utah. It sounds like you do take advantage of going skiing. You know, you can go opening day, you can drop your daughter off at her school. You're enjoying your freedom and flexibility. But I did see that you wrote an article entitled, "The First Year of Early Retirement Has Been One of the Hardest of My Life." So it's not all sunshine and rainbows?
Well, living in Utah, there is a lot of sunshine and a lot of snow. But no, it's definitely not. I mean, there was... So again, I think a lot of times people romanticize retirement as, okay, yeah, I don't have to go to work, and then all of a sudden my problems fall away. I really think what it does is it changes your life. And so, I mean, for us, it has been a major net positive. Again, we have so much more time to do these things we love in the outdoors. We have so much time with our daughter and all these things. But by the same token, there was a lot of value. I was a physical therapist, and every day I was going in and I was helping people. And I felt that appreciation and I felt that sense of purpose. And so when you step away from that, you know, you lose something. And even just in my career, I couldn't have really asked for a better employer. And that's kind of why I settled on, I really wanted to retire as a physical therapist and leave my career, because I knew that it wasn't a matter of the grass is greener and I could switch jobs and find a better employer. But I started working there in, I think, 2003, and I left in 2017. And in my office of 6 people, I was the second newest person. So like everybody has been there, and it was really kind of this family. And you know, with any family, it can be dysfunctional, and some days you want to kill your family members. But also, like, you know, yeah, I mean, it was extremely emotional just that last day, like leaving and knowing, like, I'm not going to see these people who I've spent the last 15 years of my life with 40 hours a week. I'm not going to see them. You know, I can stop in or I can call or text them, but it's just not the same. And you're losing things when you retire. So, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of things that kind of hit me harder than I thought they would. And it's been an adjustment and a challenge. And again, I don't regret anything. And I think as a net, it's a major positive. But if you over romanticize and you don't consider those things, then yeah, you're setting yourself up for some problems and some failures.
I appreciate that transparency. Chris, I'd like to ask all the Inspired Money guests, how do you define success?
I really think it's different for everybody. And so I think a lot of kind of like we talked about why we save so well, I think you have to line up your life with your values. So I think it really starts with getting clear on what are your values, and then trying to line up everything, whether it be your money, and really how you spend your time is probably the most important thing, but lining up your life with your personal values. Because if you're trying to live somebody else's life, that is definitely not going to be success. And I think that's kind of where I fell into some traps where I felt like I had to do what other people were doing. And those are probably the worst times of that I had and the worst mistakes that I made.
Valuable. So follow your own path.
Yes.
Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks for sharing your personal story as well as some of the things that you're doing. Congratulations on the Choose FI book. Can you tell the Inspired Money listener where they can find you, find the book, and follow you?
Yeah, for sure. So my home on the internet is at caniretireyet.com. And that's where I'm most active, is just at the blog. And I'm very responsive to comments and emails. So you can find me there. And then the book is Choose FI, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence. And you can find that at choosefi.com/book.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
So what was your favorite inspired money moment? I'm impressed that Chris retired at age 41. I love the way that he and his wife from the start lived off of just one income, in this case his wife's, and they banked his income. First, they used it to pay off debt, and once that was extinguished, it all went to savings and was invested. Their story shows that financial independence is achievable, and they could live better as their incomes grew. They just kept that 50% savings rate in place. If you had a different favorite inspired money moment, tell me yours in the Inspired Moneymakers Facebook group at inspiredmoney.fm/Facebook. Thank you so much for joining me on this mission. I look forward to seeing you next week, and until then, make your money matter.
The music you're listening to right now and all other music on today's show is by the amazing Jim Kimo West. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.